So an introduction to our country profiles, carbon trackers, power and utilities. We model 9,000 generation units, 20 million data points, and the model output is OPEX revenue breakdowns, project finance time series, demand constrained phase out, the LCOE and NPV, IRR, and stranded asset risk for new units. And of course, the renewables levelized cost of electricity. So it's a very comprehensive model. And as an output, we produce country phase outs, and this explores the timeline and strategies for phasing out high emission energy sources within each country. Also, another output of this work is the profitability over time. This is an important piece of analysis for the financial sustainability of energy sources and trends over time. And another output again is the renewables versus fossil fuels. This is to compare the growth and impact of renewable energy sources against fossil fuels on a national scale. So we also have a data portal, which I would like to draw everyone's attention to, where you can see all of this data freely. It's free to look at, free to navigate around, and it's very interactive. And moreover, you can download the data to use for your own purposes. I want to come to the spotlight on Indonesia and Vietnam. And we want to look at the power mix, the transition plans, economic growth, and decarbonization dilemma that these countries have. They're two particularly interesting countries because both countries share, a lot of the sort of similarities where they've got high demand growth, between 6 and 10% a year. So they've got to continually fill the gap that they have in terms of the production gap. Indonesia, in particular, 61% of Indonesia's installed capacity is coal, and since 2010, Indonesia has been the power production through coal has been growing around 10-11% a year. So it's very, very intensive. It's continually drawing on those coal assets. If you look more closely in the more recently, and since 2015, the situation hasn't changed that much either. It's around 8% per year. So the country as an overall leans very heavily on its coal assets, and this is going to be very mindful for the policymakers. The coal fleet for Indonesia again has a similarity to Vietnam, and insofar as that the coal fleet averages around 10 years old. And so these assets will be certainly be in the system for a very long time if there isn't a concerted effort to find a financial mechanism to take these assets out of play. So they're very young. As a comparison, Vietnam, 45% of its generation mix is coal. Another very high percentage. Where it is slightly different to Indonesia, its coal power production per year is growing around 20%, anywhere between 19 and 20% per year. And so that is even more so than Indonesia, and that shows how much the country leans on its coal. And again, as I mentioned earlier, similar to Indonesia, Vietnam's coal-fired fleet is pretty young, averaging around 10 years. So where Indonesia and Vietnam are very much the same is that they have a heavy dependence on the coal-fired fleet. and they also have a huge demand on the coal. When you look at their renewables, renewables is growing quite quickly, like in many countries in Indonesia, but it's certainly not filling the gap. So, for instance, since 2010, wind power production has been growing 60% per year. And if you look much more closely for Indonesia, wind power production has been growing even faster than that, 160%. So it's really rampant in that sense. Indonesia's solar power production is growing very fast as well. It's growing around 70% a year since 2010. And solar has been growing even faster since 2015, on average around 107%. What is this all telling us? Yes, coal is growing really quickly, and that's still a heavy dependence for Indonesia. And whilst it's adding quite a lot of renewables, it's just not keeping up with the demand, because the demand in Indonesia is drawing on the system. Vietnam, same sort of story. Wind generation since 2010 has been growing around 50% per year. Since 2015, the statistics are looking around 93%. So again, it's the same story. Whilst it's renewables are growing quite rapidly in terms of power production, the coal is filling that gap, and it's growing even faster. So how do we deal with this problem? How do we find, why are we in this situation where coal is growing so fast? Well, they just simply need the power. It's that simple. They also need the inertia. What does this mean? This is the stability in the system. The system operator needs stability. And while they grow their renewables, they still need a huge amount of that predictable power that is very much in demand for keeping the system stable. And also it depends where that demand is needed, particularly in industry. We in Carbon Tracker have got some enabling thoughts, if I could put it like that, for the enablers of the energy transition. We are developing a least cost financial retirement mechanism, which builds on very much on our core models that I mentioned earlier. The two main use cases is the macro level and the micro level and the macro level, as per my slide. And what this ultimately, this model does is it looks for viable mechanisms that both free up the invested capital and retire coal-fired plants early, particularly young coal-fired power plants. So it's very much geared for markets like this. The key thing here is to ensure that the initial investors and refinancers achieve their expected rates of return, and that is absolutely critical here. And so we're identifying this by unit, and that's pretty important. But what has to go along with our model? What has to go along with the success for enablers for energy transition? Well, the policymakers have to continually to be aligned. The rules and regulations have to continually to be updated in order to favor less coal and favor more renewables, and also favor grid infrastructure. Grid infrastructure is going to be the critical component to get right in order to enable a smoother energy transition. But one area I've not spoken about is market design, and market design needs to keep up with the energy transition. It needs to keep adapting, yet keep offering predictability to investors. And that is a very important factor. So if we were to look at it as one large picture, I would say that you need to induce an energy transition in essentially 4 key ways. You need to give the predictability and have a solid study and understanding around the technical economic features of any particular market. And in this case, it's in this case with the market of Vietnam and Indonesia, you need to be very aware what are the economic drivers of this economy. need to understand the social implications. What are what is a just transition for these two economies? What is going to be detrimental from a social perspective if you get the balance of the energy transition wrong? The policy, rules, and regulatory market design. This is forever an evolving situation, and there's a lot to learn from Western markets where they've got it right and where they've got it wrong. What I principally say about markets like Indonesia and Vietnam, they don't want people like us just pointing at a problem. They want us to bring them solutions that actually work. And this is where I go back to our least cost financial retirement mechanism, because we're looking for the mechanisms that will bring a transition about in a practical sense. And that is basically the goal that we are going for at the moment. I want to hand back to Shireen, and thank you very much indeed for giving me the platform to address these two markets.